You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And of course, I mean, as usual, look, we've got Acolyte news again, finally. You know, it's funny because it's really starting to heat up now because obviously we're only, well, like maybe 1 week away. No,
a week
2.
and a half, maybe.
Yeah, a week and a half because it premieres June 4th, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I think is on a Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken. Could be Wednesday. See, these are the kinds of things we should actually work out before we go on live and do the show.
Yeah, but that'd be no fun.
But no, that wouldn't be
Tuesday.
fun. That would, and that's certainly
Tuesday.
It is Tuesday. Okay, I thought it was Tuesday, but I wasn't entirely sure if it was Tuesday or not. But it is Tuesday, so it's a week from this coming Tuesday. So that was one of the reasons why, in the poll that we actually, put up for you guys, the runner-up actually to the 10 unanswered questions of the Bad Batch was actually us reacting to the Acolyte trailer. Problem is, when we started thinking about it, it's like, okay, they've released a bunch of trailers since then. And we did talk about it briefly, and so this actually seemed like it was a little bit more of an interesting way to approach the Acolyte and to talk about it leading up to, of course, what we're going to see in a week and a half.
Plus, we always get flagged every time we show videos anyway.
Yeah, that's a majorly good point. I mean, it seems like everybody else on the planet can show like entire segments of things. For some reason, unless we're constantly talking over the trailer or whatever, we always get hit. Always. So that is a good point. Like we never get a break when it comes to whenever we do a reaction. But hopefully we can eventually work those back in. But it just didn't really seem very, I don't know. It just didn't seem like a really timely thing to do at this point. Like that would have been something a month ago maybe. But of course we were right in the middle of reviewing the Bad Batch and then Tales of the Jedi, so that wasn't working. But what we actually have going on right now is something that I actually find a little bit more interesting, and that is that they're starting to open up about how they're going to deal with the Sith in regards to the Phantom Menace and how they're going to, actually start to reveal some of this stuff. Because I remember you and I, when we first were talking about this show, and after they revealed the cast, because you remember, they didn't actually reveal anything about this thing. But once enough information was known that you could, legitimately speculate a little bit, that was one of the questions we had. It's like, well, wait a second. The Phantom Menace are talking about, the Sith have been extinct for a millennium, and, it's like, I mean, it can't possibly be, and all this other stuff, and it's like, well, then you're watching these trailers, and you got what clearly looks like a Sith Lord in the trailer, and then, of course, even before that, they were talking about how, this is going to be a Sith-centric show. So it's like, well, wait a minute. Well, when does it take place then? And then it's like, oh, about, 100 years before the Phantom Menace or something. It's like, well, hold on. You can't tell us that these guys, now granted, and we're going to get into all this tonight, obviously, but I mean, you could take it from the standpoint of they were talking about the Sith before the Rule of Two, or, during the Jedi Sith Wars. I mean, I guess you can look at it from that standpoint that the Sith as a collective group have gone extinct. But again, they sounded almost surprised when Qui-Gon tried to say, I think that was a Sith. And they're like, yeah, no way. Can't be. So that's something that we're definitely going to crack into tonight. But I think that that's infinitely more interesting than just doing a trailer reaction, is discussing how they're going to incorporate this.
Yeah, I mean, I found this article and I thought it was really interesting because, to piggyback off your point, and the Phantom Menace, and that's what got Leslye Headland kind of like interested in doing this whole series, is because of the comments and things that were made in reference that were referenced in the Phantom Menace. So to your point, when Qui-Gon was like, "Oh yeah, it was a Sith Lord," and everybody's like looking around in the Jedi Council, like Sith Lord, like no, there's no way that could happen. Like they've been, gone, like you said, gone for like a millennia, and so it begs the question, you know, especially for someone like Yoda, because he out of the council, I don't know the ages of everyone on the council, so I don't know how far they can go back, but we
Oh,
know for
here, let me
sure
send them to you real quick.
Yoda.
I'm just kidding.
Oh, so thanks. You just got like social
Like,
security
yeah,
numbers and
just I'll
everything.
ramble them off the top of my head. It's like, oh, it's simple. All you got to
Yeah, I didn't
do,
want to was
there's a little mnemonic to help you remember. You just think dare, and then you just, I don't know.
So I would surmise to say that Yoda and Yaddle were probably around back then.
Man, it
Um,
sounds like a buddy cop show.
well, it's more like Ozzy and Harriet.
Yeah, though, yeah, or something like that. Exactly, like some sort of sitcom. Yeah, man.
Lucy and Desi.
Hey, you know what? Look at all the Marvel shows that were on Disney Plus. They could easily do a Yoda and Yaddle show.
Could be hilarious.
Be awesome. Coming home.
Yeah. But yeah, so the whole thing is, and this is what begs the question: were the Sith around and they were able to hide themselves from the Jedi, or did the Sith exist and it's rumored that some of the Jedi were trying to cover it up? Like, hey, okay, let's just kind of like sweep this under the rug. We don't want to alarm anyone. Let's just kind of, act like it's almost like Harry Potter with Voldemort, like who should not be named,
Mhm.
So there's that, and so it does beg the question because, of course, we know Palpatine at some point comes in. He's a Sith Lord, but we don't know when he started his journey into Sithdom. And then it could be like, maybe this is the beginning of the resurgence of it. And it's like, all right, the Sith hadn't quite returned yet, but it was like there was an acolyte around. So that was like, a Sith is not, an acolyte is technically not a Sith, maybe in their eyes, if that makes sense.
Well, it makes
So it's
sense.
like,
I mean, in the sense that what we were always told is that an acolyte is very much the Sith version of a Padawan.
right. And a Padawan is not considered a Jedi. So you're considered a Padawan.
From a
I
certain
mean,
point
you're
of
part of the
view.
Jedi. Yes, you're in the Jedi Order, but you're not a Jedi. You haven't reached the rank, much like Anakin didn't reach the rank of Master. They have not reached the rank to be called themselves, because you're a Padawan until you become a Jedi Knight. That's when you officially get the status of being called a Jedi. But a lot of people just assume that because you can use, you see it in a lot of the animations episodes where you'll see like some character use the Force, and they're like, "Oh, Jedi," and I'm like, "Well, no, like not everyone who can use the Force is technically a Jedi." So
Well, even if you can, I mean, the thing I always found, like, as much as with Anakin, you go, okay, you guys could have really prevented a lot of this stuff if you hadn't been just so crazy about, if you had just granted him the rank of master and just let him do his thing, he may not have been so angst ridden, right? So you can
mhm.
understand that. The thing that I always felt bad about was Luke, because that poor guy, every single time he would say, okay, well, I guess now I am a Jedi. And they'd be like, nope, 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 nope. One more thing you got to do still. It's kind of like, dude, I get it that in to a degree, because the council and all that stuff doesn't exist. I got to test out of these things, right? Like I can't do the
Mhm.
trials per se.
Yeah.
We've seen the trials, and as difficult as the trials may be, I mean, that's a little bit less than facing Vader and living, and then, eventually it's just like what that poor guy had to go through. Like every single time he thought, okay, well, then I am a Jedi. It's like, nope, no, you're not. And so
We
you got to wonder if the acolyte system under the Sith is the same way, right? Like, I mean, obviously somebody has to take you as an
Yeah.
apprentice, though. That's the difference.
Y well, yeah, but it's kind of the same with the Jedi, though. I mean, like, you still as a Padawan, I mean, that's essentially an apprentice, and, um, the thing is that, for at least for Luke, and, you brought up the point of, the trials versus, and that's the 2 ways you can become a Jedi. You can either go through the trials or you kill a Sith Lord. So Obi-Wan got that opportunity because he killed. Well, allegedly he killed Maul, which he really didn't, but that was the assumption. So
Right? Like, wouldn't that be
you know
hilarious if they had revoked it? Like,
that would be
yeah,
priceless.
we're gonna have to knock
Especially
you
like when
back down to Padawan because Maul's still
yeah,
technically alive.
it's like 60 now.
It's like a, it's like a clerical error in the thing. It's like,
When
yeah,
it's just
technically speaking, I mean,
it's kind of like when they take it, like Milli Vanilli when they take your Grammys back.
pretty much. Or maybe that whole speech where, they were talking about Anakin, like, we are on the council, but we do not grant you the rank of master. If you had just turned to Obi-Wan and go, oh, and by the way, we're going to have to revoke that knighthood.
hmm But technically,
Because,
you guys are the same, really.
yeah, exactly. I mean, but that's the thing that's sort of funny, though, is because on one hand, yes, if you kill a Sith Lord, it's kind of like a shortcut to graduation or something.
Yeah, it's like the accelerated course, if you will.
Right, and that's why I say I'm glad you brought that up because the whole Obi-Wan thing, right? Like he allegedly killed Maul.
hmm
Boom. Is a Jedi Knight like instantly. Now granted,
Right,
Luke didn't kill Vader,
right.
but going up against Vader and living, I got to think is
That's got to count for something,
that's
man. Can
got
I
to
get
count
like?
for something. And then he's got to go and do it again. I mean, the funny thing is like, well, you know what? No, you're not a Jedi. In fact, not only do you have to face your father again, but now you got to actually face the Emperor. And I'd be like, dude, you and Obi-Wan couldn't even do it.
Well, here's a funny thing about it. Technically, Lucas was still not a Jedi at the end of Return of the Jedi because he didn't kill Vader and he didn't kill Palpatine. So, I mean, if you really think about it, I mean, at what point? And then Yoda's gone. He's died. So at that point, he can just declare himself whatever he wants at that point.
Well,
He could call himself
exactly.
Grand Master really at that point because who was going to check him about it? There's no one else around.
Well, and the thing is, and this is why this whole Acolyte thing to me is going to be fascinating because a lot of it is going to be where everybody is getting excited. I'm talking about. They're saying things like, "Oh man, what's this new Sith Lord gonna be? What they gonna look like? What are they gonna?" My whole thing goes even deeper than that, naturally, because we have a Star Wars show. My thing is, well, like, at what point do you actually? And again, this goes into what we were talking about before, right? Because you have to wonder where, like I said, where are these people at in this whole thing? How far are they going to take it? How far into the whole Sith training? Is it the same kind of thing? Because like you pointed out, I mean, the Jedi were extremely strict about the progression in ranks.
hmm
With the Sith, a lot of it, because this is technically coming after the rule of two. It's like,
Yes.
okay, you have to have a master and apprentice. Generally, what happens is the apprentice strikes down the master, becomes the new master, and they take on an apprentice. Which,
hmm
there's a couple of different things you got to look at. Of the characters that we know, would that then make, say, Darth Maul? Because you have this distinction between an acolyte and an apprentice. So it's almost like the acolyte is the apprentice in waiting. A perfect example would be like Asajj Ventress or maybe
Right.
Starkiller. You know,
Right.
those kind of guys where they're being trained by the Sith apprentice. So that way, when they then strike down their master, they've got an apprentice sort of in the wings that they can then take on as their
Yeah.
apprentice. So it's going to be really fascinating to see, well, how are these guys progressing and are they going to show that? Or
Well,
is it just going to be an LGBTQ celebration?
that's
There's basically the
yeah.
danger of that too, the way that they're trying to cram the whole agenda in. But I really hope, given, and again, I will say this, I'll point this out, as much as I rag on the whole agenda thing and all that stuff, which is very much a real thing.
hmm
The one thing that does give me hope, though, is that Headland does seem like kind of a super fan in a lot of ways. Like she's really thinking about these things, right? Like, well, wait a minute. When I was reading about that whole thing about her quote, talking about the dialogue in the Phantom Menace, and having your mind wander, like, well, wait a second. Basically, pretty much like how we introed this whole show is essentially her quote, right? So it is nice that she's actually thinking about this stuff. Like, she's not just, there might be a woke agenda thing, like a component in there.
Sure.
But then on the other side, though, it also seems like this could actually be a really good show because she really seems to care about the franchise.
Well, yeah, she's been quoted as being like basically like this super fan of Star Wars. Excuse me. And
well, look at her.
so,
she wasn't dating in high school, clearly. I say that out loud. And I don't know. It's
man.
Look, man, it's late.
I can't even say red card. I have to say like red saber or something like that. That's just, it's just so hilarious.
It's late. It's
hey, we're here now. I would just say that, with her being a super, and that's great and that's cool, and I love to hear things like that.
Me too.
And
yeah.
my thing, the two things that I'm just most concerned about, and I think possibly that the story, because that's what we always, really truly hound on with these creators and these directors and the franchise as a whole, are the stories that they're telling. Like, is the story compelling? And that even goes to the Phantom Menace. A lot of people didn't like the Phantom Menace, when we've covered this numerous times, but
even in our recent review of it, when we did the What is Star Wars thing.
Yeah, and a lot of people have an issue. People are like, oh, it's all this trade stuff and all this crap. We didn't want to see all that. But I'm like, no, that it was actually really, the story was good. But then the other part of it is the execution. Those two go hand in hand. So if you could have a great story, but if it's poorly executed, it's all for naught, unfortunately. And that's the same thing that happened with the Phantom Menace. The Phantom Menace was a great story in and of itself, if you just take it for what it is. The problem was the execution of it, which made it, and then of course, and going into the execution of it, by that I mean the directing of George Lucas directing the actors. That was the first time that, people had probably done that much green screen work, because that was a new kind of technology at that time. You had, and he was pushing the envelope from a technical perspective. And unfortunately, it made the story itself suffer. Not that the story that was written was bad, but the execution of it just didn't land well with a lot of people until years later, when people kind of started looking at it, under the microscope. And it's like, well, let's just separate the execution from the actual literal story. And that's cool. And so that's what I'm worried about. And I think this is a great place, because in the Acolyte, from what we're hearing, it's like 100 years before the events of the Phantom Menace. The Sith are around, but we don't know if, and that's to me, that's going to be the part that I'm looking forward to the most is, did the Jedi know that the Sith were around and they tried to hide it, or were the Sith just that clever as far as shielding themselves away from it, to the point where, because it could be so, and that's what could be the thing. It's like, okay, well, and I'm assuming that the difference between Acolyte and Sith Lord is power. See, and the thing is that what we don't see on the Sith side is you don't hear master. I mean, you hear like, yes, my master. You hear that.
Right.
But it's always like, okay, so if we look at the ranking system, it's Acolyte, Sith Lord, Master. Assume, but the Sith Lord is also, the Master is also a Sith Lord too. It's like Lord Sidious and Lord Vader. So there's nowhere it's like, okay, when on the Jedi side, you hear, Jedi Knight versus Jedi Master. It's a clear,
there's a distinction there, sure.
Yeah,
but I mean, I also think, though, that if you want to take it from that angle, then the Master and the Apprentice would be Sith Lords. The Acolyte hasn't made it there yet. Like I said, Asajj Ventress is probably a really good example of that. Now, of course, I don't know. I'm trying to remember. I'm not sure how clear it was that Dooku was actually training her to be a Sith apprentice versus she was like an assassin that he had trained to use the Force. I mean,
See, and that's the thing though, and that's one of those things that I always found that was very curious because I was very surprised that Palpatine allowed it for so long. Now,
mhm.
granted, at some point he did put a stop to it because he felt like she was getting too powerful, and he was like, "Okay, you got to do something about her because one, you're losing control of her, and then two, she's gaining in power, and you're my apprentice. So, in order to prove yourself, either she's got to go or you got to go." And I'll take her because if you can't, I will. You know what I mean? And that's kind of a cool thing. I mean, quite frankly, I would love to have seen more of that. But I'm really curious as that why Palpatine allowed that to go on for so long. No difference than I guess it was kind of, and you almost kind of have to wonder like what level of skill or power constitutes a Sith Lord versus an acolyte.
Well,
Because if you
yeah,
look,
you're talking about like kind of at the apprentice level, obviously.
well, because okay, when we look at episode 2, Anakin, Attack of the Clones, Anakin, right? He's still a Padawan, and we can tell that he's still a Padawan. By the way, even the way he fights, don't get me wrong, like he's pretty good against like most things like droids and so. Of course, he can wipe those out easily, fine. But even dueling, like when he went up against Dooku, he didn't last very long. But you see him in episode 3, it's a whole different ball game. Like he came to play ball, and he won. So it's like you can definitely see the growth. But if you look at Asajj Ventress, Asajj has always been good. Like if you really look at like she's hanging with a Revenge of the Sith,
Yeah. No,
Anakin, and
absolutely.
an Obi-Wan. You see what I'm saying? Like an Obi-Wan is powerful, and she's not like giving up ground with these guys really like that. The only time she really cuts and run for the most part is when she has to deal with both and they're just overwhelming her. But
Yep.
if you catch them one on one, like she's holding her own. And the
Mhm.
same goes for when you look at Maul when he had Savage Opress. Savage Opress would be more like an acolyte, whereas
Yeah.
Maul, of course, is more on the Lord side. No pun intended. But
Yeah,
I
exactly.
should realize how that kind of sounded,
No.
but but he's a Sith Lord, but at the same or he was a Sith Lord. So now it's a question of like at what skill level do you become, because I often wonder like in episode 3 when we see after Anakin takes off, lops off Mace Windu's hands, and Palpatine launches him out of the window. He's like, "Okay, henceforth, you should be known as Darth Vader." But then he also called him Lord Vader in the same movie. So did he automatically just reach the rank
Well,
of
yeah,
Lord
because I
because
think that if you're an apprentice, that's the thing. I mean, for that part of it, because I know what you're getting at. You're like, well, he wasn't even an acolyte at any point. He just like went right to, okay, now you're my apprentice. You're a Sith Lord, but that's because
is it because he already has so much
yeah, he
skill as a
already had
Jedi
so
that it
much.
just
Exactly. It's
like
like
his
this
credits
is like
transferred?
yeah, right. Exactly. His credits transferred. Plus, he had work experience. That kind of thing. So, but I mean, even
Right.
and even to go back right to your point about Palpatine letting Ventress live,
Mhm.
you have to remember that Palpatine would always allow things that seemed a little strange for him to allow because it actually served his greater purpose, right? So I think as
True. Very
long
true.
as Ventress actually had a role and he was using that. And of course, it's
True.
almost like knowing, it's like, look, man, I know you're training this and I'm going to basically let you have this until I decide it's no longer needed and then I'm going to make you kill her after you trained
Mhm.
put all this time into her training, and you're probably hoping that one day, you guys could band together and overthrow me, and maybe not, because honestly, that never really seemed to be Dooku's motive. Like, you never really got the vibes that he was ever going to try to overthrow Palpatine.
And maybe that's partially why he wanted him killed as well.
Oh, sure, like, he's not even worthy of it, right? Like, dude, you don't even want to kill me. What kind of Sith are you? But
exactly, you don't even have the yellow eyes.
Exactly. Anakin's like a Sith for 5 minutes. He's got yellow eyes.
Exactly.
What's up with you?
Right.
And I think a lot of it comes down to, and we talked about this actually when we did, ironically, that's why this is another really good sequel show in a way, because we just got through talking about 25-year anniversary of the Phantom Menace, and some of the, not only some of the problems on the filmmaking side and how it was received and everything, but also within the lore itself. And we talked about that a little bit. And that's why I think that you do have this distinct difference. Dooku never really seemed to want to overthrow Palpatine. And you might be right. That might have actually been sort of an issue with him. And so because of that, that's another reason, besides, of course, he could have, even if you wanted to overthrow Palpatine, it's like, okay, you can have Ventress because she's serving a purpose right now. But as soon as I deem that purpose is done, then it's over. But I mean, the fact that he wasn't even looking to, at least seemingly looking to overthrow him, well, then that makes it even more benign in a lot of ways. Because now Palpatine doesn't necessarily have to worry about the whole idea, let's say, of always having to be careful. He can allow him to train her, and then everything's cool. So Ventress is one good example. Of course, Starkiller's another example, Vader's apprentice that we learn in The Force Unleashed.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea between because here's where it really gets muddled. I mean, I'm right in the middle of explaining this whole point, but now I'm really going to go crazy, and I'm going to throw another thing in there. Because you would think that the Inquisitors could technically be considered acolytes. So what's the difference there?
Yeah, that's a very valid point. Valid point.
The Sith side of things is very, very crazy.
Pathways, some to believe to be unnatural.
Well, unnatural and like just chaotic. I mean, geez,
Well,
that is. I know that's like in the, but I didn't think it meant at the administrative level though.
It's like our core values.
Right. I mean, do you get like some sort of a little packet, this is your welcome package. All right, Ted Adam Green is joining us. He says, "Hey guys, I'm looking forward to what Acolyte will have to actually offer. May the force be with you all, and I'll watch this tomorrow, because I'm almost asleep now. Thanks for podcasting." Yeah, I admit I had to have a little bit of chemical help to stay awake today. Look, doing these 11 o'clock things is kind of rough sometimes, depending on, So, I mean,
work day.
Exactly. So, that said, yes, what the Acolyte actually is going to offer, we don't know. Precisely for exactly what we're talking about now, right? It's like, okay, what's the difference between an Inquisitor, an Acolyte? The Apprentice Master, we pretty much get, I think, but...
Well, I think an apprentice is the Sith Lord, too.
Oh, yeah. They're both Sith Lords. Once you get to the apprentice level, you're a Sith Lord. That's when you move into it. I think all the other stuff, that's the distinction. Because the novels tried to expand on this a little bit, because in, I think it was the Aftermath trilogy, that's where you remember all those guys in The Rise of Skywalker that were chanting Palpatine's name on Exegol and all that stuff?
Mm-hmm.
So they seem to be heavily influenced by what were known as Sith acolytes in the Aftermath trilogy novels. And they basically were almost like monk-like beings that were devoted to Palpatine, Vader, everything else, and they were keeping that whole thing alive. Like they had Vader's, they didn't have his body. They had something though. Maybe
They're like
even the
disciples,
helmet.
basically.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Like followers of Palpatine, essentially.
Yeah,
Like you
pretty
just
much. And they were referred to as Sith acolytes. And
Mhm.
that basically stuck. So when they started to come out, hey, we're going to do this new series called The Acolyte, my mind instantly, before it was even known that it was going to deal with the Sith, I'm like, well, it's got to be. It's based on what it's called.
Mhm.
And again, you wouldn't necessarily know that if you weren't reading the books, but for those of us that have, that was a mystery that was pretty much solved like right away. But the question becomes, which is what we're talking about, right? You bring this whole big picture. You have essentially, well, we don't even know what Asajj really was, because they even had
Yeah.
another classification. I remember they would say, like, say Mara Jade, right? They're kind of like Sith assassins.
Assassins. Yeah.
So you got them, you got Inquisitors, you've got, the Acolytes, then you have, of course, the Master and Apprentice. The question is, you can somewhat understand this from a hierarchy standpoint, but from a power level standpoint, and what do you have to do or achieve or whatever it is to get to that next level? What
Yeah,
are the
because
differences between, like, say, an Inquisitor and an Acolyte from a power standpoint?
you almost have to even wonder, like, so does Grievous fall into any of that?
Exactly. I mean,
Because
with
technically he was trained in the Jedi arts in the sense of combat as far as
combat,
lightsaber duel. True. And now granted he doesn't have the force, so it's like does that
I think so. I think that
not put
that
him
eliminates him from,
from the running at all? I mean,
we're sorry, you are not the biggest Sith.
yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like you could make him almost like an assassin though. Like
Well, yeah,
in
that's
some
true.
to a degree that you could probably call him an assassin in a way.
Yeah, because I
But
don't actually
and
think
that
Mara Jade had the Force either, to be honest. I mean, I think she might have had like a little, and I know Luke was starting to teach her a little bit of stuff.
Mhm. So and that's what I'm saying. Like I think they're just so, and this is why I wanted them to explore the Sith a whole lot more. And I hope this is the precursor to that is that they start delving more into that side because we've seen so much of the Jedi. We know like okay, they find kids when they're young and then they try to indoctrinate them with their philosophy and ideology and try to get them to follow into the Jedi path and go up the ranks and and basically be a
It's like they're
servant
in
of the
the
people.
they're in the kid's house. Chris Hansen comes out. Well, what are you doing here? Why don't you have a seat over there?
Right. Take your hands out of your rope. Take your hands out of your rope, please.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And it's like, so do you have any condoms in your ship? Are we gonna find anything? But I mean,
What are you doing? Something good?
yeah. Here's the thing that I find interesting, though, when you're talking about the Acolyte series, because on one hand, yes, I don't necessarily need like a video version of an encyclopedia. On the other hand, I'll tell you what my concern is based on what you're talking about. Because I agree, we really do need something that sheds the light on the Sith. Now, of course, you want to do that wrapped in a good story,
Yeah, absolutely.
but that's not the part that bothers me. Because on one hand,
What's
you
troubling
had
you, Eric?
well, so here's okay, there's two things that happened before the trailer and then there's something that happened afterwards. And I'm even leaving the woke part out of this.
Okay.
So, the first two things that we were told about this series, one was, yes, we're going to learn more about the Sith and the way that they train or deal with or, rise to the ranks or whatever the case may be. Then the second thing we were told was, oh yeah, and it's also going to be kind of like an Indiana Jones archaeology type adventure, right? Where some characters going off and, I don't know,
Mhm.
looking for Sith artifacts, I guess. I mean, that's some of the implication that we put into it. That may not be the case.
Right.
But those are the first two things. And you're kind of going, well, okay, if somebody is part of their training, maybe they're trying to find out more information, you can somewhat marry those two concepts and be okay.
Yeah.
Then the trailer comes out. And then they start framing it, oh, it's going to be almost like a Jedi whodunit. Which that is also very intriguing. And that was one of the things about the trailer that I thought was really cool. But my problem is this. It now seems like it wants to be 3 different kinds of shows.
Mm.
And my concern is, on one hand, if they're good storytellers, they can weave that in, right? They could take each of those angles and pretty much knit them together into a cohesive storyline. My concern is this is Lucasfilm we're talking about.
Yeah, in today's age, right?
In today's age. And what concerns me is that will this end up being somewhat convoluted and not really be satisfying for any of those? Yeah, on any front. Exactly. Because these are things that I think that you're 100% correct on here, is that we really need something that gives us a little bit of a window into the Sith side of things.
No, I mean, that's a valid point and valid concern, I think. And, I never thought about that, but that's a very poignant comment in question. And I think, I agree that if you can find a way to weave it, I think that would give it a whole lot of depth to it, to be honest with you. And I think that's something that's sorely missing in Star Wars sometimes, which we're getting in stuff like Andor.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what, but it just can't be as slow. But I don't think it will be.
No, but for one thing, it's how many episodes is this? Do we even know? I think we do.
I want to say it was 10, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's either going to be 8 or 10. That's the sweet spot. That's usually what it is.
I want to say it's 10.
Well, if it's 10, that would be hopeful because Andor was only 12. So they could actually go into some, deeper concepts because they actually had the time. I mean, that's like twice as long. Well, almost. Andor was exactly twice as long as Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was like
6.
briefest. Is it?
Yeah. Well, no, I'm talking about Obi-Wan, not the Acolyte.
Okay, I thought maybe because
I was answering that question.
Well, I saw you looking some stuff up. I'm like, well, wait a minute now. That just negates everything I just said. Yeah, that was Obi-Wan was 6, and that was a little bit too short. That really, I get it. You don't want filler episodes. You don't want a frog lady looking for her eggs kind of thing. I mean, I understand that part of it. But at the same time, I do think that, because again, I think that what they were talking about was like, look, we were planning on doing this Obi-Wan thing in like 2.5 hour movie. So we don't want a series that's like, 6 hours or something. But at the same time, given what we got and some of the things they wanted to explore, if they were just keeping it Obi-Wan centric, I would have agreed with 6 episodes. But you bring Third Sister into it, you bring, Leia into it, you bring Bail Organa and Mon Mothma to a degree into it. I mean, you actually could have expanded Obi-Wan out to at least 8 episodes and made it a little bit more satisfying. Did you find out how many episodes this thing is?
8.
It is
8.
8.
It says, so the first 2 episodes, when the other 6 will be released weekly. So, yeah, it's a total of 8.
Okay, so that's another good thing to know, too, because obviously, well, if it comes out Tuesday, okay, that's perfect, because usually Friday is our review shows. So, yeah, that's what we'll end up doing Friday the 7th, is we'll be reviewing looks like the first 2 episodes of The Acolyte. Yeah, I'm really pumped to see this thing, man. I'm cautiously optimistic. That's generally the way that I put it on any of these shows nowadays. I don't want to take
times. It says about 30 minutes, with like the finale being around 40 minutes. So I'll say they were somewhere between 35 minutes, right?
I mean, on one hand, I get it. It's like, look, if you're giving me these things and saying, look, we want to streamline it, we want to just really give you the meat on the bone, so to speak, well, then I can get behind that. But a lot of times with these shows, I've just found 30 minutes too short, to be honest.
So it says, although Acolyte's story would span its first season, Headland remarked that she doesn't view the 8 episode thing as telling a single 4-hour movie. I think that this was this continuous thing, like a really good album. It's meant to be sat and watched and listened to and all that kind of stuff. But actually, I think it's more of a weekly experience, and I think that is good that it's a weekly experience, because I think when you're dealing with really heavy issues, especially in Star Wars, I think having a break for a week is actually a good idea.
It could be if there's actual depth to the story.
Right, you're not your depth being this woke agenda, right?
Either that
You have to wonder what
or
she means by you have to wonder what she means by depth.
well, yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, I didn't even think about that, but you're right. That could actually be her referring to that. On the other hand, even if you leave that part of it out, I still think it's dangerous because I don't know how much depth you're going to get in 30 minutes. And the reason why I say that is because you're exploring territory that I think would benefit more from a 40 or 45-minute show. Now, again, I am fully willing to say, okay, look, I'm not going to armchair quarterback this thing before it even comes out. In fact, I'm usually the guy that after the first few episodes drop and everybody's got their scissors out and they're just cutting it to shreds. And I'm like, well, wait a second, guys. I mean, let's wait at least until we get halfway into the season to really get a feel for where this thing is going. You can't just base it on the first couple episodes. I mean, you can certainly, because the first couple episodes, if it's doing its job, should give you the tone. It should give you somewhat of the story arc, the characters, whether or not you're relating to them. You know, there are things that you can glean, obviously, from the first couple episodes, but still, I think it's dangerous to go too psycho in just either praising it, because I'll go that way too. Because besides all the critics, you know, there's people that'll watch an episode or two and say it's like the best thing ever. And it's like, well, slow down a minute. It may not be. You know, how many times have we seen these things where it starts out phenomenal and then they drop the ball at that very end?
Well, yeah, as David is notorious for, mentioning like the beginning of Ahsoka, like, when we see the opening scene of Ahsoka when Balin and what is her name?
Yeah,
She
it's like,
something.
because you always want to say like
Her.
Shakti, but like
Yeah, it's not.
Shin T or Shin something.
Yeah, Shinti or something.
something
But
like
when
that.
when they step onto that ship and those rebels officers start shooting at them and they're like blocking them, and then they kind of go to waste them all in like 30 seconds. Like that was a great opening, and it's like, okay, you're like, yeah, and then you get the rest of us soaking, you're just like, eh.
Well, and I will say, but
You know
even
what I
in
mean?
that,
And
if you
it's
remember, we were warned because it was kind of like you knew that these guys, were. I mean, it's just like I remember we were just shredding that like no tomorrow, because that happens in the opening. And even though that scene ended up being cool as far as being action packed, I still think it didn't make a whole lot of sense from a writing perspective. It's like, come on, man,
yeah.
you're not going to invite these guys onto your
Yeah, the
ship
way it happened,
minimally,
yes.
yes, minimally armed and all this other stuff, and then I mean,
Especially
come
when you're
on.
transporting these high important prisoners,
Yes,
it's
it's
just
just.
like,
I
okay.
mean, that was when I started thinking, because I remember when we reviewed it, I said something to the effect of, okay, it was eye candy, right? It was a nice executed scene,
Cute
but
girl, no brains.
yes, exactly, right.
Yeah. It's a cute girl with no brains.
Look at her,
Like,
don't
all
talk
right,
to her.
exactly.
You know,
And I think that's just one of those things that unfortunately we've come to expect from this era of Lucasfilm. And so, yeah, to your point, like I said, from earlier, the story of it sounds great, and I think, like you said, if there, because the concept is essentially like, okay, a bunch of crimes have been committed, and they're trying to figure out, like, okay, what the heck is going on?
Yeah,
And
because
they're going
Jedi are
on this
actually
whole,
dying,
like,
and they're not used to Jedi
yeah,
dying.
yeah, and it's like, okay, at an alarming rate. So they're like, okay, well, what the heck is happening? We need to investigate. So that's the whole who done it part.
Hmm.
And I think in the midst of that, you're going to look at clues and the artifacts that are left behind. It's like, well, this is reminiscent probably of the Sith. And are the Sith really around? I thought they were dead and extinct. And there's probably that. And then you have, so I mean, I'm guessing that's kind of the premise of the show. And once again, it's just like some of the stuff in the trailer when they kind of do the whole crouching tiger, hidden dragon thing. That already
Yep,
kind of threw me off. I'm
I
like,
know. I know.
I'm already kind of like cringing because it's like this is so cheesy.
There's a lot of elements to this from the trailer, where you're just going, I mean, and again, it's one of those things, like you said, there's certain things in it that make you go, all right, that's kind of cool. I'm curious on where they're going to go with that. And then there's other stuff where you're just going, here we go. This is going to be another one. I mean, granted, it makes it fun to review.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's like I think it's cool where, and I'm gonna make a comparison. So when you have characters who traditionally, as we've seen them, like, okay, in the original trilogy, we always talk about like the lightsaber battles and how it was supposed to be heavy. They were more like broadswords, and it's like, okay, there are these wide sweeping movements. But then we get to the prequel trilogy, and they're like, now they're doing flips and cartwheels and all this kind of fancy stuff, and they're moving, lightsabers at like lightning, pace. Okay, I'm with that, and it's cool, and it definitely makes it more entertaining and engaging. Absolutely. Now all of a sudden it's like they're throwing in like martial arts into the equation. And you're kind of wondering, like, okay, so why did you all stop that?
Well, I think
Like,
they're
and
going
then,
to explain is more or less a progression. And it's probably when
well,
Yoda gets a hold of it.
possibly, but then the other part about it is kind of like, and the comparison I was going to make is like Iron Man. Like, even though Robert Downey Jr., he studied, like, for whatever reason, he studied Wing Chun and for the Iron Man stuff. And it's like, but we're not, Iron Man is not a character that we're used to seeing do hand to hand combat. He's technically driven. He's using gadgets. He's like, a glorified, if it was Batman, sure, we know he's a martial artist, but Captain America, okay, yes, I would expect, Chris Evans to do more of that than Tony Stark. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of a weird thing for me to now all of a sudden see, like, and I get it, it's ancient, and maybe they were trying to, they were more about using hand to hand more so than the force. I don't know. It just seems, I don't know. It just seems weird to me
Well, I could say
that they,
this.
the way that they're doing it. Like, if you kind of incorporate like in a natural fight thing, but the fact that they're making them do all these like I said, crouching tiger, hidden dragon type stuff, it just looks weird.
Well, I can tell you this. In the High Republic comics and in the books, their hand to hand was used in conjunction with everything else.
Mhm.
Now, it is a little strange though that if because you got to think in terms that the old Republic resisted too, right? This is something that you would expect to see in like the Dawn of the Jedi movie or something, where they're going all the way back to the beginning when they discover the Force and they
Mhm.
had the crude lightsabers, and they actually Jedi at one point. I mean, I don't know. It depends on how much they're actually making all this stuff canon, but it was widely regarded. Let's put it that way. The Jedi actually just used regular swords.
Yeah.
And then they had somewhat of like an energy sword, and then of course they did the whole kyber crystal thing and they created lightsabers. And that's when it really turned the corner as far
It's
as
high. Yeah.
yeah. But the thing is, you would think that yeah, by that time they would have progressed beyond the hand-to-hand combat to the degree that it was shown. Because even in the High Republic era, which of course this takes place at the tail end of the High Republic, even in that, you see there's somewhat of a balance there. They're not really, they're using the hand-to-hand stuff to supplement everything. I mean, even if you look in the original trilogy, Luke kicks Vader off of the, top of the stairs or whatever. I mean, there's a little bit of hand-to-hand going on there too. Just to gain the advantage of your opponent. I mean, that's part of sword fighting, really.
Yeah, I mean, I get I get in the prequels, it didn't make sense to use a whole lot of hand to hand because you're fighting metal most of
Well,
the time. You're fighting
right.
droids.
But even then, there was a couple times they kicked them.
I mean, yeah, you might have, did a drop kick or something like that, but I mean, for the most part, I mean, you're not gonna, trade blows with a
Right.
droid because
Yeah.
it's metal.
Yeah, that would hurt.
So I will understand. And I guess, like I said, once again, I don't necessarily have a problem with them using martial arts into it. I think it's just the way that they're doing it. Like you're trying to make it too, like I said, this crouching tiger, hidden dragonish, where I would prefer, if you're gonna do it more in a traditional, like Enter the Dragon, just where it's more grounded, to say the least. And I get that you have the Force to help you with stuff.
Exactly, I was just gonna say that. I mean,
but it's
look, if Bruce Lee had the Force, trust me, he would be using it.
Well, yeah,
to enhance what he's doing. But that's not even what I was gonna say, though. What I was gonna say was, in answer to your concern, I think that we have to be careful again because we're seeing this in the context of a trailer, and we all know how trailers are edited. They're done so to basically make you want to go see the thing or whatever, but they're very often taking a lot of things out of context.
Sure.
Part of that is because they want to throw you off and, make you think that there's two characters, like there's a storyline that they want to emphasize in order to throw you off of what it really is, so they'll edit things a certain way. Other times, they're just trying to give you an overall feeling as far as what's going to be in the actual show or film or whatever the case may be.
Right.
But that's why it's a little disconcerting. Yes. But I'm trying to remember the fact that, look, I'm not going to base this simply on the trailer. I've seen some of the follow-up trailers, and there have been some where I'm like, okay, now I'm actually a little bit more excited for the show. And then there's been other ones where I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I like that or not. We'll have to see. Again, we're just going to have to really watch this thing and take it in and see where they go with that, because I understand that concern. Because if they start doing an over-reliance on the whole Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon style, it's going to take you out of Star Wars a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's the concern I have. You don't... Sometimes I think the trap is, okay, all this stuff has been done to death. What new thing can we put in to...
Right, exactly.
And that's part, to me...
something we've never seen in Star Wars.
Or something... Exactly. But to me, that's part of catering to the agenda. Maybe not so much the woke version of it, but the whole, with every generation, it can't be timeless. We have to throw in stuff that the kids nowadays will like or whatever. It's like you don't understand how sophisticated kids actually can be. If you just give them these timeless things or whatever, they'll like it. There's things that are what we call the story tropes and all that. Well, or maybe this is cliche or whatever. Well, it's for a reason. Because it works. It's because people respond to it. No matter how many times we've seen it, no matter how many times, sure, you'll get people that are always wanting something new. Right? Like, oh, give me something new. You could do that. You don't necessarily have to bring this kind of thing in there. You can put things in a new context or present things in a new way. You don't necessarily have to shoehorn in really cool, things or whatever that might not be natural for that particular franchise. In this case, Star Wars.
Yeah, I think when it comes to And I know we got to wrap this up, but I think I'm going to make this probably like my last point. But I think to that point, Eric, I think a lot of times what happens with Star Wars, and it's you're trying to, so when the fans are saying like, you got to give me something new, right? I think they're trying to go, I'm going to use once again my famous sports analogy. You're trying to go from your 20-yard line to their end zone in one pass.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, it's just make the mark, just get the first down. Like, just do little things. Like, I think that if you really like show a little bit more drama, that's something you don't see a whole lot in Star Wars. You don't see a lot of the like anger or like them. Like, I think that's what made Kylo Ren so interesting because he was so unhinged and he was always angry. And you hear, yes, I can feel your anger. And you said like, more, that whole scene, he was just like, and that's why it was so funny when Huck's like, do you think you got him? I mean, that's what made that so funny because Kylo was so passionate about trying to kill Luke. I mean, you saw it in his face. He was shaking. I mean, he really hated him. And then that moment was just like, okay, well, Hux makes the comment like, you think you got him? And then, of course, coupled with Luke now just standing there doing the whole, yeah, you didn't touch me. That made that scene so great was because you had 3 different types of reactions all in one moment. And I think I thought that was well done. I think that if you bring in, like, I think the whole force projection thing, like everybody lost their minds, including me, because it's like we had never seen anybody doing it. And it's like that really showed because we've been waiting the whole time to see, okay, we know Luke is like that guy. We know he's the Grandmaster. We need to see, if we're not going to get a lightsaber, but we need to see Luke be Luke. We need to see him way beyond Return of the Jedi. So when we see the fact that it's this whole force projection thing, you just see him floating in one space and his body is present in another and he's physically touching people, you're just like, holy, that was good. That was a perfect use of doing something different within the realm that made it believable, that fit, like you just said, that fit within the context of the story.
Well,
so if they would continue to do stuff like that, I think we'll be all right.
And I do need to take this time to say that I sincerely hope that Ronaldo watches this because you see like a 3.5 minute love fest for something that was actually in The Last Jedi. So
I know, right?
That's something you don't really hear every day. Or something that was in The Last Jedi. Hey, we need more of that. So
right,
yeah.
Exactly.
So hopefully he actually,
point.
Yeah, if he's not one of the people watching us now, which he probably isn't, otherwise he'd be commenting. I hope he does check that out because that's something you don't want to miss. Yeah, I mean, I think for me wrapping it up too. Look, I think that them trying to connect this to the Phantom Menace is a really good idea. Mm-hmm. I think it's a great thing to take a look at some of the dialogue because that's really where you have to end up. I mean, if we're only 100 years or whatever it is, then obviously that's like the end game there because it's too close.
It's the torch passing too because you're ending the High Republic. Mm-hmm. Before you get the whole, I don't want to say New Republic, but you're getting the the known Republic that we all kind of grew up on. So I think that's a very good space, and even in that, like you still have 100 years. Like if this takes place within 100 years before the Phantom Menace, you can still do shows that takes place 30 years, 50 years.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, there's actually more to do in this period than even post Return of the Jedi to Force Awakens. You only have 30 years there.
Right. And you still can get us closer to the Phantom Menace. Now you can start covering Palpatine if you wanted to. If you want to do a Palpatine story, you can drop him into that in that moment. I mean, there's so much.
Sure. How does Yoda transition from what the Jedi Council was like in the High Republic to
Yes,
what
yes,
becomes, I mean, sure, there's
absolutely.
a ton of stuff you can do. And
Mhm.
again, I don't remember. Did they talk about how many seasons they wanted the Acolyte to go to? Do you remember anything?
No, they
I
haven't
don't
said
remember
anything
a
like that.
number either. I don't remember. Like, I know Andor was like, okay, we're gonna do 2 and we're done, and
I
there's
think
like,
it's probably gonna depend on the success of
well,
Acolyte.
sure,
It's probably
yeah, but I
if it's
just
well
wonder.
received, then yeah.
But usually showrunners will have some form of an idea. They'll go, okay, this is the
Well,
story we want to tell.
we'll find out after they cancel. Like, yeah, we were intending to go in about 5 seasons with it, but
Yeah,
after
well,
the
that
first,
could, yep.
you know.
Well, you do get stuff like that, right? Where you get surprise cancellations. Other times, if you're lucky, they'll warn you and be like, guys, you know what? This isn't doing well. This is your last season. And they can go, okay, we'll just accelerate the planned storyline a little bit. We'll just cut a bunch of stuff
Mhm.
out. And, instead of doing another 2 seasons, we'll just make sure the story is essentially wrapped up at the end of this one. So there is that. So I'm just curious because it makes you wonder how far into this are they going to go, right? If they start out at 100 years, are they going to do a bunch of time skips?
Mhm.
Are they going to pick a little chunk of time so each season is a year or each season 6 months or whatever the case may be? I'm just really curious on how that's all going to shake down.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
It's gonna be interesting.
yeah. It's a little late on the chats today. In fact, the only chat we got was Ted saying he's going to watch it tomorrow.
Like I said, like you said, Eric, it is late.
It is late. Yeah, I know. Sometimes, a lot of times, yes. If we have to do the Sunday afternoon ones, we'll get a little bit more. But hopefully, you guys are, there are people watching it. They're just not chatting, which is fine. But
Right.
to each his own, I guess. All right. But for those of you who are actually just doing it with us live late at night, we thank you. Of course, if you want, you can always go to our Discord. You can do the buy me a coffee thing. Definitely like and subscribe because that really helps quite a bit. And we do want to grow this channel, put ourselves in front of more people and really grow the community. So that way we get all kinds of diverse opinions and you can really have a much, much greater discussion when you have a lot of people participating. So that's actually amazing. So, of course, let us know in the comment section. You're watching this in the rebroadcast. What are you thinking? I mean, do you think that this is a good idea to tie it to the Phantom Menace? Some people might not. Some people might want this to be its own thing and perhaps maybe tied more to the High Republic and let something else tie in a little bit more to the Phantom Menace. That would be an equally valid point that would be worthy of discussion. Let's see. Monday. I don't know what we're going to do Monday. We'll see. You just have to watch. If we do something Monday, then you'll catch us live right here. If not, then of course next Friday will be our last show before the review of The Acolyte. So you're not going to want to miss that. All right. So with that, thanks for watching, guys. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.